what motivates Zoodan and everything else, and maybe a little bit more of his history. But one of the fun things I like to do, and is this, have you ever watched any of the other interviews so far? You ever go back and
Actually,
look at it
no.
and be
This
so
is.
surprised?
I'm going in this as a virgin,
As a
completely
cold
just untouched.
turkey. All right. Well, first thing, I've already missed the first requirement, which is normally I have a handle of Jack Daniels over here on the right side so that we can, really enjoy the time. But we can enjoy the time anyway. But so one of the things that I like to do on the show is to talk a little bit and get Zoodan's, and I promise I won't tell. And just like you, nobody else watches the show, so you're probably safe. But I like to get Zoodan's opinion on the different characters in the party because it's just, how can you not ask this question when you have an opportunity to have alone time with a player? I mean, I'd be hard pressed to pass it up. So we're gonna do it as long as that sounds right.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. First up on the chopping block, Bruin Boozebeard, your fellow dwarf. His background, as we've learned in his adventuring, is really to seek out and bring back to his homestead the perfect ingredient for brewing beer. I mean, that's his thing, right?
Right.
So, what does Zoodan think of this other dwarf in the party?
Well, he has a lot of respect for him, honestly, because in dwarven society, I would think that the perfect brew, to say, would be pretty up there. I mean, you have a high standard in dwarves, right?
Yeah.
With the type of alcohol in the beer or ale they drink, and to have something come back that's something so good that your family's name is known throughout the dwarven kingdoms for their brew, I think is a good goal to have for somebody who is a brewmaster, and that's what he is, right? He's a brewmaster. So I think his goal is sound for what he does. That's his trade. That's his livelihood. Unfortunately, he's stuck in the same spot I am, right? Which is, we're both stuck in this land where we can't get out of, and we have to defeat Strahd in order to get out.
Right.
So, what can you find here that's special in any way, shape, or form? And right now, I guess the winery is the closest thing we've come to a unique alcohol beverage.
Yeah, and it is at least the sample that you guys got to have in the last gaming session. I think, and maybe it was underplayed a little bit, but the vintage that was shared with you guys as a reward, a couple of interesting things about that vintage is that particular vintage, they can't make it anymore. Something's happened to the land, something's changed about the winery, that vintage, the grapes aren't producing like they used to that would yield that kind of vintage. So it's really an interesting thing because it's, hey, this touched my lips and is by far the best wine I've ever had. I mean, it's so complex and it's got all these flavors and it's amazing, but yet I can't reproduce it. So, I mean, it was kind of an interesting deal. It'll be interesting to see what Bruin does with that, kind of piecing it together. The land itself is not, wine is the primary staple of Barovia. It's not like your typical other D&D adventures that you get into where the ales and the beers are prevalent. And it's mainly that the things that this particular plot of land actually was able to produce grapes, where nowhere else in Barovia could actually even produce the grapes that would be suitable for wine. So the raw materials themselves are just not there. They're not prevalent. And so, wine has really become a staple. I mean, alcohol is a staple in general. I mean, they're giving it away, right? I mean, as a supply. So it'll be interesting as I think the characters and the party continues to peel back layers of this onion, and how, and I think the way that the module is written is really complex, because I think you guys are going to start to see more things that are kind of interrelated starting to unwind, which is kind of fun. So there's a good question for you. Have you, in the past, because you've been a gamer for a really, really long time, what was your first gaming experience or role play experience, Ken?
Oh God, let's go back to the 80s. I would say it was, I graduated high school in 93, so that'd be 86, 87, around there. I was in junior high, 6th, 7th grade, around that time period, and I met up with some friends that I have no clue what gaming was at that time, right? Mm-hmm. No clue whatsoever. And I had a friend of mine that I've met at school. We went to the comic book store. We would just hang out and read some comic books at the comic book store, and we saw these books because you go to a comic book store, there's always gaming books there.
Right.
And we saw some gaming books, and we were like, I don't know what this is, but let's check it out because we're bored one day. So we pulled the player's guide off the shelf. This is AD&D, by the way. This is the
advanced version. Sorry.
Yes, the player's handbook was that blue one with the wizard on the front.
Yeah,
and it just looked cool. I mean, it was one of the first cool looking books for D&D, and it was AD&D, right? So it was more advanced. So
where they actually started having enough money to incorporate people's artwork into the books instead of just raw text, right?
Instead of just a box set that which I did get I ended up getting later, but this was the first book I purchased. So I pulled this off the shelf. We started reading, and I was like, what in the world is this game? Like, what is this thing? There's levels, there's experience points, there's monsters, there's spells, there's all this stuff. And I was like, I've never seen anything like this before. So me and my friends, we're like, okay, well, let's give us a try. And we tried honestly to get into it. And at first we started out with just graph paper.
Right.
Everybody starts with just graph paper, right? Creating that little dungeon that makes no sense whatsoever. Nothing's in the right place. But you just kind of go through it, and then you roll some dice and things happen. And there's not even a lot of monsters. It's just like a simple trap is befuddling to you when you first start playing D&D.
Yeah.
You're like, how the hell do I get past this pit? It's a pit that's blocking my way. How do I get past it? And then now as an older player and experienced, there's so many different ways to get past the pit. But back then you're like, well, do I climb down into the hole? What do I do, right? So that's my first experience in junior high. That was it. And then from there, it just snowballed. I mean, we played AD&D. We went from that to Platium. You remember Platium?
Oh, yeah. Oh, goodness gracious.
That company, Platium?
Yeah, right. Yeah. I think I call them Palladium, but that's probably just my terrible...
Palladium, Paladin, whatever you want to call it. But they came in, and this is about the time when the Robotech cartoon was really big.
Oh, yeah.
So Platium came out with because they're using the D100 system, the D20 system, and all the skills were all percentage based, right? Your skills were like 37% or something crazy, and you had to add 10% in assorted percentages to your skills to level up.
Right.
And they released a Robotech role-playing game.
Yeah.
I saw that and I went, holy shit.
Bonkers
that
time.
That is the coolest thing ever, right? And so I immediately bought that, and we started playing the crap out of Robotech. I mean, I was absorbing the books because the books could come out, and I was reading all the Robotech Sentinels, Invid Invasion, the whole 9 yards, and incorporating that into this campaign, and Cyclones and Robotech, Veritex, all sorts of stuff happening. And the weird thing that really introduced me to that game, the coolest thing about that game, besides percentage skills, was the fact that there was standard damage and mega damage.
Mega damage!
It just blew my mind. Like vehicles had one damage capability, and regular guns and swords and knives had another damage capability. And one was 100 times greater than the other. Yeah. So you had this silly little, I pinged you with 1 mega damage. Well, that's 100 standard damage, and you just got splatted, right?
It sounds so innocent, but it's really not.
It's not. But from that, we went to Ninja Super Spies, because that's the exact same thing for Platium. And then we went into Rifts, and Rifts opened my eyes to a completely different world set, where, if anybody knows Rifts, who watches this, if anybody ever watches this, the whole, after it's post-apocalyptic, these rifts have opened up on the planet, and they're interdimensional portals that go to different planes of existence,
right?
And things just warping in, and craziness ensues, right? And ley lines exist, and now there's magic involved, and there's super science because it's all advanced technology, and there's AI brains and all sorts of weirdness. But Rifts really opened my mind because it just made the world so much bigger. Like Robotech, okay, you think of a Robotech, it's just Robotech, right? And you think of D&D, oh yeah, you have a campaign, it's just a tiny little dungeon or maybe a city or something, that's it. Because we played D&D for years and just Waterdeep. We never left Waterdeep.
Yeah.
We got the Waterdeep Forgotten Realms box set.
The campaign module or whatever that whole thing was. Yeah.
Yeah, and I read up on Waterdeep, and we all played Waterdeep for like years. Like I think
Right.
2 years we played Waterdeep, and that was it. We never even left the town,
Right.
except for like a little tiny excursion on the outside. But
Right.
Rifts, man, I was my first true attempt to develop a world, and so I took all those source materials and I said, okay, this is my world. This is what the books portrayed as, but let me tweak it here and there.
Right.
And I ran a campaign for Rifts, and that was my very first real campaign running was Rifts, closely followed by the D6 version of Star Wars.
Yeah, old school.
Yeah, that Star Wars one, I ran a campaign for my buddies in college. I was in the Corps of Cadets. So my buddies in college, one day, it was winter break. It was snowed in. It was iced over. Things happened. Everything was closed.
Which is tragic,
And-
by the way. If none of you know College Station, Texas, it's right outside of Houston by about an hour or so, and snow and ice, where some of you guys probably don't equate. The little bit will bring the town to its knees. So anyway, context.
Yeah, we go crazy when there's a little bit of ice on the ground. Everybody freaks out, right? So we're all snowed in, and I was like, well, let's do something. So I went ahead and got that Star Wars game out, and I started teaching people how to play Star Wars. And that was the first time that I've ever had to teach a new group of players, brand new players who've never role-played in their day in their life, how to role-play a game. I had to use the D6 version of Star Wars as that first attempt.
You poor bastard.
And well, I think it worked out because people had watched Star Wars,
They
right? They understood it.
right. They were already in love with the deal. It was just incorporating the system.
Right. So the story was easy. They understood the world. They understood how technology worked in the world. They understood how these superheroes were basically the main characters in this world.
Mhm.
And we were playing smaller characters that are, the ones that you don't really talk about in the story because they're not important enough. And that was my first attempt to try and really put grittiness to Star Wars.
Right.
What we see in Star Wars is all super clean white and black, and
It's very
it really isn't a
very
lot of
separate.
grittiness.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, even Mos Eisley Cantina, that's like the seediest thing we saw in the movie, and that really wasn't all that seedy if you think about it.
Right. Right.
So I was like, oh, let's go ahead and try and make Star Wars into what I would think Star Wars should be. And I think the Edge of the Empire, the current fantasy of flight version of Star Wars, is actually closer to what I envisioned a Star Wars campaign should be like. Mechanics aside, which I still don't agree with mechanics of Fantasy Flight Star Wars.
There are some strange mechanics.
But as far as the way they portray the world, the universe, the galaxy, I guess, that's how I played my D6 Star Wars campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So there were drugs, there was crime, there was death, there was the Empire was not nice, and neither were the rebels.
Right.
And so that was my thought process way back in 1995. And I guess maybe I was forward thinking. I don't know, whatever. But I've always appreciated grittiness in role playing games. I always did not like the fact that I would never let's just have this sword and this shield and be heroes. That's never really appealed to me on a long campaign.
Yeah, and I I'm definitely inclined to agree. I mean, and we can definitely, bring us back to this campaign for just a little bit, but Ken was with me when really started playing the Fantasy Flight version of Star Wars here recently. We just got done with the campaign not too long ago, unfortunately because of availability and it took a really bad turn in a particular, what I would say, poorly written campaign module, and it was very hard to adapt into that group. But I agree with you. I think what was really great about the dynamic of that game, and I will give Fantasy Flight the credit for the cinematic nature of the way that their system's written, you really could explore the gray, right? You could really explore being in that middle ground, caught between the good side and the bad side, and it was interesting to explore because in that middle ground, determining what is good or not good or bad became really, it was gray. You know, you could see Jedi coming in there doing just as much bad as some Imperial force, and on the other side you see people just trying to survive, right? And they look at that the Empire was providing protection. So I think it was such a cool experience to watch, and we had some inexperienced players that were just introduced to role play when we started that campaign.
Which some of them did amazing.
Oh God,
Super.
Oh, absolutely. I think some of those guys just hit the ground running, and it was amazing to watch that world expand in their character and
Right.
watch them go really see what it's like. I mean, it was really cool. So 100% agree with you that, and actually, I hope that we rebirth that campaign at some point.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
The Razor's Edge is such a cool concept as a company, and then the interweaving with the Empire and everything. I thought that was just really cool. So yeah, I hope we get that campaign going again. But back to this one. So what's really interesting with this 5e movement, so 5 editions later, right? We've been around watching all these source books and all this go on, in this community, and that's what it is. I mean, gaming, and especially Dungeons and Dragons has had such a large community for so long, and we'll talk about some of the other communities that I think both you and I have traveled in before. We'll talk about a little bit like that later, but the Dungeons and Dragons community, I think, is really foundationally one of the biggest tabletop role-playing communities that is, and it certainly I think has the longest and most storied history. But of course there's the other systems. But what I found interesting with the 5e is they looked at some of the old campaign modules that were around when you and I first started playing, and it just so happened that Ravenloft was actually one of those campaign settings from way back in the day. And so now with the 5th ed movement or version, it's been really neat to see them taking and really polishing off some of these old campaign settings and giving folks like you and me a chance to kind of relive some of that story, right? So did you ever play Ravenloft or anything in the Ravenloft campaign setting, even as a one shot or anything like that in the past?
I remember when Ravenloft first came out, like when it was first introduced as a world within D&D. And when I first saw it, I guess it was intriguing because there's all this undead, and there's this big vampires in charge of a lot of things, and all these minions, and it's really the fight of dark versus gray instead of light, right?
Right.
In the Ravenloft world, there isn't really a light. The best you get is gray.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
So it's really a game of survival. It's not that you're trying to defeat Strahd, at least he is known here in Ravenloft, because you can't, not unless you're like a level, I don't know, 15 level party, and you're going through, you get to go through all these minions and get to his castle, which is full of traps or whatever. But what intrigued me about it most was, here's a campaign setting where the undead are not just a villain of the week, not just some fodder that just gets thrown at you to make experience points happen for your characters, your party.
Right.
This is a bunch of undead that have personalities. They have goals. Yes, they're not the best goals. They're not the best personalities, but they are no more than just the mindless zombie that goes around eating brains.
Right.
I think that's what really intrigued me about it. Now, this is way before I was introduced to Vampire the Masquerade, so I didn't know that side of the vampire genre. But Ravenloft was interesting. I don't think we only played a couple games in it. It was a difficult thing to comprehend when you're younger. It has a lot of adult themes in it that you might not understand
or appreciate.
And so, or appreciate, right? So I think it was just too young to really delve into it.
Right.
Most of my second edition of D&D games were more on the Forgotten Realms side of things, and Ravenloft was kind of a one shot. We tried it and it didn't work out.
Cool.
But now, if we want to segue into something else later on, we can talk about the CAM and how that influenced me.
Well,
And
Yeah,
you, right?
yeah, for sure. So real quick for everybody watching, because we've picked up some more people. One, thank you for the follows. Two, go tell all your friends to tune in and listen. We're going to be here a little bit longer as we're talking with Ken, aka Zudan, one of the players in our Curse of Strahd 5e game. So definitely, just to give you some context in case you're just now joining us, this is Before the Curse, which is a chance for us to kind of interview gamers, talk to our players, and allow them to really get to know them as a player as well as a character. So we do this segment hopefully every chance we get to talk through all the players, and we'll cycle through. But the really important thing is we want you to participate as well. So if you have any questions about Curse of Strahd, Dungeons and Dragons, or anything that we're talking about, we want you to become involved in the conversation. You can do that through Twitch or Facebook or whatever medium in which you're watching this. Just send us a message, and we'll bring it up on the show, and we'll talk about it. And who knows, we may even just shoot you an invite to the Discord and have you join the call. You never know, because we like to keep things fluid around here. So there it is. Welcome to Curse, or Before the Curse, or After the Curse, depending on what your context. But anyway, okay. So as I was saying, we're talking with Ken. Zudan is the character. Ken is the player. Has a lot of personal history with me, Micah, aka NPC, Dungeon Master. I'm sure there's all sorts of other words, but we were just discussing kind of Dungeons and Dragons of the past and of the old, and how we've grown up in that system in the RPG world, or the role-playing game world. And now we're about to segue into something very, very interesting, the dark side of roleplay. Or I would say the more socially misunderstood realm, I think. I would say probably the more, in my opinion, the more enriching and the more theatric. So if you like theatrics and drama, it's the place for you. I think what we're about to talk about, and to prepare you, is akin to kind of some of the things you've seen made into facade in movies. I can't remember the name of it. The one that was recently about LARP, the Boffer LARP. Golly, I can't remember that.
The one with Peter Dinklage in it?
What's that?
Was the one with Peter Dinklage in it?
Yeah, that one.
Fantasyland or something like that?
No, I can't remember. Well, there's been a couple of them, but anyway. Role Models. I think Role Models was the name of the movie I was thinking about.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that kind of talked about Boffer. So when we talk about Boffer LARPs, right, which I've been a part of, or reenactment LARPs, you think about Amtgard, or gosh, there's a whole bunch of different ones out there where you actually dress up, you go into character, and you reenact that time period, whether it's fantasy or something like the SCA, which is a lot more period historical based. But all of them are about becoming, your character, becoming what's going on, and then acting it out with a bunch of other folks with the same settings. So Ken and I were actually, and Ken was involved in it I won't say way before, because yes, you're older than me, but just, you're not archaic. You're not like a Methuselah.
Not yet, at least.
But Ken and I were involved in a group, the Camarilla, I think, and I'll let Ken explain it all in more detail. But we were basically, it was a vampire LARP, which is somewhat relevant to what we're doing now. And I think that what was really interesting is that drama and facade was all there, and I'll bring that back to Curse of Strahd and what it is, and how people kind of perceive it and look at it here in a little bit. But Ken, tell us about the Camarilla and VLARP as a whole, or Vampire Live Action Roleplay.
All right. Well, the Camarilla back then was a nonprofit organization, right? It was a service organization that had two sides to it. The LARP, of course, which was everybody's fun and games part of things. And then there was also the service organization and community organization part, where we met a bunch of people. We made a lot of friends in the cam. And we did a lot of service things. So we would do like Big Event, which is a big drive here at Texas State University to do cleaning and help older people in their backyards and that sort of stuff. It's a community event. So we did things like that. Also did a lot of picnics, barbecues, etc. So on one side, half of the game, or half of that organization, was a nonprofit service organization. The other half is the game, right? It's all volunteer driven. It's not, no one gets paid. I'm not even going to go into the prestige system because it was broken as all hell. But Basically, we got this prestige points, and it equated to us getting better characters, kind of like experience points for your characters. But instead of earning them in game, you could start at a higher level because you did service organizational stuff. I served in just about every role you can think of in the organization, from the chapter level, which is a local level, to a domain level, which is kind of like multiple chapters, to a regional level, which is the South Central region, all the way to the national level, where I was the ICC coordinator. And so I've seen it all from all spectrums. But really, when it comes down to it, what we're talking about right now, as far as role playing is concerned, I learned how to really role play at in the Camarilla.
Yep.
I took what I knew, what I thought was role play in tabletop games and that sort of thing, and doing the kind of voices or character interaction and that kind of stuff, and improved on that by not only trying to be a character that you're trying to be, which is your character, but also dressing like your character, having mannerisms like your character, really being your character when you're in the game. In fact, my goal as I became older and older in the game, as experience as a player, was a night that I didn't have to do a single challenge was my goal in the game.
Yep.
If I could do 4 to 6 hours, and these games for sometimes 4 to 6 hours, sometimes 8 hours.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Just interacting with other people playing their characters, and if I could not throw a single challenge, which is basically like rolling dice in D&D, right, doing an actual challenge, I won. That was my personal appreciation, because I role played through the entire night and got whatever I needed to get done without doing a single challenge, without using a single power, vampiric or otherwise. And that was it. And I think in the game, you start to learn how to manipulate characters and people, and you start to organize groups, and you start to do a bunch of things in character that you never thought you'd ever do in character.
Right.
Like
right.
stuff you never think about doing in tabletop. Yeah. Like in tabletop, as a D&D player, or as a Rips player, or any choose your tabletop game of choice. You're not gonna go in and you're not gonna manipulate the other players at the table to do what you want them to do in a group setting. You might, say, hey, let's go down this path, right, and try to convince them to do that, but not really manipulating,
right,
on a political level,
right.
And when you're in a game with sometimes 30 to 50 to 100 people, and these games are sometimes 100 people big, you're playing people off other people. You're working the room in a charismatic kind of way, or you're working the room behind the scenes. There's so many different ways to play the game, overtly and covertly, that you learn how to role play not only as a leader type. I've played some leader types, as you know, but also as not leader types, things that's working in the shadows and not wanting to be known, not wanting to be seen, but moving things behind the scenes and manipulating things. And so there's so many different ways to play it. You can play crazy, you can play not crazy, you can play like a bruiser, you can play intellectual, you can play whatever you want. And I think that freedom, it's really, really, really developed me as a role player, and it changed me. It's not only a game, it actually changed my personality. I grew from being in the cam, and I met some of my best friends in the cam. I've met my wife through the cam. That game wasn't just a game for me, right? That game changed my life, literally. Changed my life.
I mean, I look back at this, some of the, and even today, and I've done so much in gaming. I mean, from running a troop game, right, a VLARP, or writing. I wrote for Living Greyhawk for a long time, and that was a lot of fun. I mean, so all these different experiences, but I still go back that VLARP experience. I mean, guys, we would go right at dusk and start playing, and there were many, many nights that the game would end at sunrise. I mean, it was so profound that we'd end up going over to the IHOP next door afterwards because it was breakfast time, or the kettle. And I think that's one thing I've noticed, in that community. It was that everybody was so not just vested in their characters and their character success, but they were so in love with the dynamics of the game. And I don't mean the system. I just mean the world
Right.
in which they all created and they participated in. And it was so cool to be a part of that. And you know what's bad about it though is that now that's the standard I look for in any
Right.
game that I participate in, and that's
Yes.
hard to deliver. And
Right.
and especially as a GM, as a dungeon master, when that's your level as a player, you're always asking. You're like, every session I'm in, it's like, am I being too much of a dick? Or am I really creating a world for them to choose their own adventure and get that kind of engagement level? So it's its own, I mean, pardon the pun, but it's its own curse in some regards too, that we had that experience. But you're right. I mean, I met you and a whole lot of other folks through that, and it was really really cool. And I I don't know if there are games or communities out there anymore like that. I just, I've tried to go back to the can before, and it's not that, doesn't seem like it's that community, but I don't know. Maybe if you get more involved, it turns into that, and it still is, and it's just more of an outsider looking in kind of thing. I don't know.
I think it's a certain kind of magic that we experienced during our time in the cam
Mm-hmm.
that will never be experienced again. And I'm not saying this because those young whippersnappers don't have it, don't know how hard it was or anything like that. It was a certain combination of individuals that could never be repeated. Right? It was the birth of a game. It started in 1991 as a tabletop game and got reborn in 94, I believe, or 93 as a LARP. And when I joined in end of 95, early 96, it was already on its third version or second version of the rules.
The Laws of the Night,
Yeah, Laws of the Night. And it was published into a book. Before then, it was just a pamphlet. It was literally just a pamphlet and a binder of some pages. And everybody had to print out their own rules. But I did not realize when I joined the CAM in this particular area, Bryan College Station, that we were the first domain in Texas and the first domain in the South Central region, and that this was the birthplace of the CAM within this region of the United States. And I think that was just dumb luck for me, because I was up against players and people that were so good at what they did. Some really good role players. Remember Gina Valentine? If you remember her.
Yes, yep.
And even my friend Jackson Roberts, who's still in town. When he played Werewolf, man, Night Silvery Hunter, you appreciated that character. You saw him play, and you were like, I can see him playing a Silver Fang, which is a tribe in Werewolf. By the way, the Camarilla was not just vampires; it was werewolf, it was changeling, it was wraith for a little while. So there are other venues involved, but these people got so good at portraying certain character types that from that point on, whenever I thought of a Silver, I thought of Night Silver Hunter.
Yep.
Right. It was hard for me to think of a different kind of Silver Fang. Or when Seth played a Shadow Lord, I believed he was a Shadow Lord, and that was why.
Well, for me, I like Balfour. Some of the characters that Steven played were just like, especially in the vampire lore, he not only had the physique for it and that presence, but he had the presence for it. It was really freaky. But I mean, it was in a great way. But
he was a psychology major, so he used that schoolwork, that ability to know how to manipulate people from a clinical sense, and used that with his personal method, just charisma that he had, because he had that ability to just draw people in and really listen to them. And it was either he was faking it or not, I don't know, but he was good at it, and people just wanted to follow him. So there are these characters I'm exposed to that were just so damn good, and I look at that as a bar, and it made you want to be better.
Yep, sure did.
Right, because you're interacting with these individuals who are so good. You're like, I want to be good as them. I want to be on the same level to make them go, wow, I appreciate this dude because this guy's trying. He's just as hard as I am.
Right.
And I'm enjoying this exchange.
I'll never admit this to Jackson, but I'll admit it to you. I think one of the pivotal moments in my role-playing career was realizing Jackson as a Silverfang was very intimidating. I mean, his character was extremely intimidating, very intense, right? But there was this pivotal moment in my gaming career, and I would say even in my own like that self-confidence level that broke at some point. And it actually gave birth to the Taps character that I started playing shortly thereafter. But it was the realization that here's this big intimidating character, but how I react to it doesn't have to be the way that Micah as a person reacts. I could react with whatever kind of confidence level or response that I wanted. And the way that I presented myself, right, and how I did that would have its own ramifications, but you were free to do it. And it was really interesting the first couple of times that I actually, pushed myself out of that comfort zone as both a person and a player and actually make a stand against, something being intimidating like that. And I think the pivotal learning part for that is that transitions very well into real life as well. And those, not necessarily, I mean, intimidation doesn't always have to be fear or, somebody standing up really big in front of you.
Right.
But it's that, look, you can recognize the situation you're in and the dynamics of that, and you choose how you respond to it. So never tell Jackson that he was responsible for helping me, grow in that way as an individual, because I'll never hear the fucking end of it. Pardon my language. But anyway, it was just really interesting. And I still, even I think the other part with the friendships that you built in that whole thing. I remember you and Matt Scogging is getting pulled over in my old single cab truck on the way to an event up in Dallas. Just so much funny shit that took place during that whole thing. So.
Oh yeah, we had so much comedy going on as well. Just because we were all friends, right? And mm-hmm. I think the closer we were, or the more we played together, the more we became more than just friends. We were family. Mm-hmm. And because we hung out together constantly. Oh, yeah. We were always, we were at games together, or if we weren't at games together,
we end up as roommates
about gaming.
People's
we end up as roommates. Yeah. Not to mention the emails, because part of the camp that no one probably understands the most is the fact that there was an in-character email list.
Listserv.
A listserv that was done by clan or tribe, by region, by nation, and you could literally, as your character, post in-character emails to each other mm-hmm. in response to whatever happened in the games, right? Because this wasn't just a local game. People don't understand this. This was a global game.
Yeah,
things I did in this domain could affect the region
other people. Yeah.
Or other people, like in Houston or in Dallas, and their games would be affected by character, what my character did in local.
And you know what? That's a very interesting point, because I think I've seen a lot of games that I've worked with over the last 5 to 10 years here have really struggled with how to bridge that multi-region, multiple location influence game. And I don't know what it was about the magic of that coordination or that system. I mean, whether it was the national storytellers and how they gave plot and things down to the regional, and the regional to the local or the domain levels. That system worked really, really well, and I think it's often been copied, but I have not seen it work really very effectively in any other system. I mean, I think Living Greyhawk and some of the Living campaigns that were at the height of their models, oh gosh, man, it's probably been more than 10 years ago. When those systems were going on, you had the con play, you had people traveling all over the place, and you had these really dynamic interweaved campaign modules, right? That the results would be reported back up, and then depending on what happened, the writers would change something in the theme. So, but what I guess I'm getting at is the Camarilla was really, really good at running national plot lines. As frustrating as I'm sure it was for a lot of the storytelling staff, because I know for a fact that in some cases it was extremely frustrating, the amount of volunteer work that went into those positions, the amount of yourself that went into those positions is what made that work. And I have yet to see it replicate in any kind of meaningful way to have that kind of effect. I mean, we could literally go from Texas to Salt Lake City and not miss a beat as far as the game is concerned.
No, yeah. Your character, you just call up that storyteller in that place you're going to and saying, hey, I'm coming into town. Can't play my character. And as long as your character stats on a piece of paper checked out,
yep,
they were good with it, right?
yeah, it was pretty incredible. So let's come back around to this fifth ed. I think you and I could probably lament for the next freaking 4 hours if they gave us time. But all right, so what I find another interesting thing about, and I'd be curious about your opinion, is Curse of Strahd. I think the thing that's odd for a lot of D&D players, especially or people who have a perspective of D&D and what it is or isn't, they're not prepared for what I think is really true about the Curse of Strahd. I think a lot of people, when they come in and play any campaign setting, either they're homegrown or another campaign, they've got that traditional Dungeons and Dragons kind of sense in mind, right? Where there's intrigue and there's plot and there's things that happen and there's always this dungeon hack and slash and the different flavors of things that go on. But what I think that makes Curse of Strahd so interesting is they're not hiding the fact, and in fact they're really trying to be over the top about it, that this is, no kidding guys, the romantic drama that is Dracula. I mean, there are so many references. Everything about the story is, this is your chance as a player to be in that world. I mean, it is. And I think even the authors and some of the people that I've been reading a lot about it, that was their intent. Their intent was not to sugarcoat it. Their intent is, you're going to go play in the time of Dracula. You're going to go see and experience that from a fantasy standpoint. And so all that romance, all that drama, which I think is what makes the vampire saga, right, or the vampire genre so interesting, is that's what's really going to get amplified in the game.
It's difficult, I think, to translate. I think it's difficult to translate to D&D, and I say that because D&D traditionally is a tactical game.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
We all know it's at its roots in a tactical war game, and then they added story and other things to it to make it flesh it out over time. But now we're trying to go to the opposite direction, which is, we have these mechanics we need to follow because it is D&D, but we're trying not to use them. Right? We're trying to do everything via role play, and the mechanics are just something that helps role play along. It's not really the main focus. And so many people who play D&D, it takes a while to get to that point. Because you start out, what's the most important thing? Your hit points.
What are my stats? Yeah, exactly.
What's my magic weapon? Why haven't I got a magic weapon yet? I'm level 3.
Right.
And that's what people look forward to, right? They want to just kill things, or they want to power game that okay, this combination of spells with this ability, whatever, will cause this incredible amount of damage, and the DM will suddenly be
powerless.
Powerless to stop them. And for some reason, this is a win for them, right? And sure, cool. That was my win also when I was 16 years old. But as you get older, you start to appreciate that there's so much more to the game that you need to figure out. And so there's nothing wrong with playing that way. It's just realize that if you keep playing that way and you never explore any other avenue, that you're missing entire portions of the game.
Yeah. And there's so much of that. And I think it's interesting, and we'll actually go back to talking about Zudan's perspective of the other players here in a minute. But I think that's the interesting thing I'm finding with this particular party is, there's some sessions where that happens. There's some mechanics in the game that I'm starting to kind of curve a little bit, because I think it goes right back into here's another combat, right?
Right.
Versus, is it really advancing the plot, right? Is it really meaningful, right? But I think that there's this healthy balance of combat versus intrigue, and I think we started off really, really well with the intrigue and kind of laying things out, but over the last couple of things, it's gotten a little bit dry. So I'm hoping that we bring that back around. It'll be really interesting because, and we'll talk about this in just a minute, I think that the party right now is at a very interesting decision point. It's been somewhat on rails up to this point, unless people just did incredibly stupid things. But like stab Strahd, or sorry Ryan, or go to the castle, which dude, why didn't you guys? I mean, it was right there for you. I mean, hell. Anyway, I'm hoping that we get more of that intrigue, because I do think that the player group here is right on the verge of that, having that capability from a role play sense to really get involved as the plot evolves, and as the intrigue involves. And so I'm really excited to see kind of what happens. But anyway, it's just been an interesting perspective.
I think it depends. Because we all know, we've seen vampires, and trying to begin from my cam experience, we've seen vampires of all different types.
Mm-hmm.
People play vampires of all different types.
Mm-hmm.
And as we all know, we go back to the roots of a vampire, and they're scary beasts that drink human blood and kill humans, right? They're not nice creatures. There's no romance to the standard vampire, the legendary vampire.
Mm-hmm.
It's not until, Bram Stoker that you have the romantic side of a vampire.
Yeah.
And so now everybody looks at vampires as, it's this romantic, either woman or man, and they can mesmerize people and they can get them to do what they want to do. There's always a sense of romance and sex involved. There's always that. Even if they're killing machines, there's still some romance and sex involved.
Something. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's not just the killing machine part. So this story has that romantic side of things, and I think the characters, we as players understand the romantic side of things because we know Bram Stoker Dracula, we understand how it works. But as a player, as a character, Zuden doesn't get that.
Right.
He has no clue.
Right.
What do you mean romantic side of things? A vampire is an undead creature that kills people and does whatever it wants to do because it can. And it needs to be destroyed because it's the opposite of good, right? It's the epitome of bad. So let's kill it. And there's no reasoning about it. There's no way for Zuden to suddenly wake up one day and go, "Oh, you've convinced me that Strahd is good." It's not going to happen, right? Unless he's charmed or his brain is wiped or something like that, or he becomes a vampire thrall. There's no way for him to go, no, I would rather kill myself than become a vampire.
And I think what will be interesting to watch is that as a party, you guys have just barely scraped the surface of the, what I'll say are the motivations, right? Strahd's motivations. Yeah, he's screwing with you guys right now because you inadvertently met him pretty early. And so, he's definitely... But I think there's an appreciation that should happen. The fact that he didn't just destroy you guys outright. There's something more to this, right? There's something more going on or at play. And I think I'm really interested because there's a couple of characters you met that I think are going to come back around, as you can imagine, as the story advances. But with the diversity that we have in the players and the characters, I'm really, and I think I will have done my job well, right? When there is that inter party conversation about should we destroy Strahd? I mean, that's to me, if there's that moment of doubt. I mean, yeah, let's face it, Ken. He's an evil fuck who's oppressed people, and he is the land and won't let spirits leave. Yeah, your character Zuden, no doubt, is like, man, yeah, screw you, buddy. But it'll be interesting to see. Now, I mean, I do think most of the characters have a pretty similar aligned, I'll say, conviction. So it may not be that hard, but I guess what I'm getting at is I will have done a good job if however many months from now or whenever we talk again, what is your opinion of how are people perceiving things right now? They're very much black and white as we speak, but it may get a little more gray. Is all I'm trying to say.
I don't know. I think a lot has to do with the player. To think outside the box. So I don't know what I don't know what Dave or Ryan or any of the other players, Jason, think their players know or will do. I mean, Jason does because Jason has a little bit of cam experience as well, so he understands a little bit about the expanded role play setting. But Dave and Ryan and Catherine, I'm not sure if they're like what their experience level is as far as players are concerned in tabletop. So
Mhm.
when they react to something, I'm not expecting an Oscar-winning performance. That's not why we're here. If we were Oscar winners, we would be in movies. But to at least attempt to think about how your character might portray something outside of yourself
Mhm.
as a player is the first step. So I think the best recommendation or the best advice I can give any player who's attempting to jump the gap from I am simply a player playing a character to I am being the character in a game is to think, what would my character do in this sense? How would they react to this
Right.
sense? Not what I can do, but what will
Mhm.
Zuden?
Yep.
But also the problem is, and this is a lot of younger players do this, they get to that point, but they strive so it's either on or off.
Right.
Right? My character would do this, regardless of the fact it destroys the party and completely ruins the campaign. Well, no, that's not why we're here. We're here to have fun, number
Mhm.
one, right? So by doing that, does everybody have fun? No.
Mhm.
But can you do something similar that
It
doesn't
delivers the
destroy
same
the
thing.
campaign?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And my character then goes, okay, well, my character does this because he believes he's doing something correctly. But by doing that, I'm not destroying everybody or putting everybody on the spot to be dead,
Right. Right.
whatever the reason. So you have to be responsible. That's the next part, right? Not only am I being my character, but now I have to be responsible.
Yep.
And those two things are difficult to learn.
Yep.
It's not easy. It's something you learn over time.
Yep.
So as far as how my character thinks of the other people's, I'm not going to comment on Jason's new character because he knows jack shit about him. But I'll say about like Gildan.
Let's talk about Gildan. Yeah.
Will Crawford is a relatively new player. He's been playing role-playing games for 2 years now. He has his own campaign he's running and everything. But he's fairly new, and he's learned a lot from myself and Jackson and these other group that we're a part of. And he's just blossomed. Like, he has just become something. He was like, where was this my entire life kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's taken on, and he's doing a great job. Gildan, the character, as far as Zuden is concerned, is another person that he relies on who recognizes the light, because he's a Aasimar, right? As Aasimar with like some kind of like holy or light abilities.
Mm-hmm.
He's a monk, so he has order involved, and so he follows certain orders, and he has a certain morality to him. And Zuden thinks of him as, hey, this is my compatriot in good. Right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is my friend. So whenever things I need someone to lean on when it comes to like I need some more moral support from good, he'll go to Gildan for that.
Excuse me.
Let's see, Nyla
Sommerheim, Elven Paladin, aka Slenderbutt.
I understand how the character in my mind reacts or acts, but Catherine plays her differently than I guess I'm expecting. So I'm slowly moving myself away from the stereotype I think in my head, and to the way she's playing her, and giving her the benefit of the doubt, like basically saying, okay, there's a direction she's going with this character. She's learning how to role play. It's like she's learning how to do that, and so give her a ton of slack. But as far as Zuden is concerned, she's not paladin. She just isn't. She's a wannabe paladin. She's an elf fighter who thinks she's a paladin. Essentially, she has the powers of a paladin, and he's like no idea why she has powers of a paladin, because she doesn't strive to any morality. She doesn't follow any god. She doesn't pray. He has his ancestral sword that she doesn't give a shit about really half the time, and she can't hit things sometimes. So it's like he just looks at her and goes, "Why are you trying to be something you're not?" You know, it's like she's trying to be something that she's always been told she needs to be, but has never really believed it herself.
Okay.
And I think that's an interesting point. And if Catherine would hear that and go, oh, well, kind of something I wouldn't mind incorporating into my character, I think it makes complete sense. Someone who's kind of lost, who knows she needs to go in a certain direction, but doesn't quite know how to get there. So she goes through the paces, but doesn't really believe it herself. That kind of thing.
That'd be interesting. Yeah, that could be leads to some interesting dialogues between the two of you. Could be fun. Anyway, because I think Zudan's character is probably, I think Zudan and Nyla are the two characters that are at least poised to have the greatest amount of conviction, at least from a religious sense. Other than maybe Gildan to a degree, but I think that's more martial, right?
Right.
So I think the material is there for some interesting dialogue and intrigue, and we'll just kind of have to see how that goes. So.
No, definitely, and I think maybe unconsciously Zudan's like, I'm gonna try and maybe guide Nyla over to a better person, to be a better person, to think things through or look at things in a different way. But we'll see, right? That's it really depends on how the interactions go.
Right.
Now, Ryan's character.
Mel Bates, the human rogue.
I really don't. I don't know what to think of Mel Bates. Zudan is very confused how this guy even exists. Like, not so much that he's just not there, but he seems to be so erratic that Zudan doesn't understand how he's still alive. Right, because he goes and does things that are just like, did you think this through? Even a little bit. And then yet he somehow pulls through. So it's kind of like, it's almost like Jason's old character, Felix. Maybe Mel should have good luck.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe Mel should have the luck feat. Because he seems to do some of the most, like, why are you doing that? You got yourself in trouble again. Oh, you somehow got out of it. I don't know how you did that, but okay. And that's it. But as far as personality is concerned, Zudan thinks Mel's a fuck up. He's a liability.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate, but that's what he thinks of Mel. But Mel's also like the rogue that's always constantly, hiding in places. He attacks Strahd, the young boy. Zudan ripped the letter up. Sure. Zudan wasn't going to attack the messenger. He was just going to rip the letter up, make a point.
Sure.
Things like that. So I think Zudan has a long way to go with Mel to get to a point where he actually starts to really trust him.
Gotcha.
Or rely on him.
Yeah.
Because right now he's just an extra blade, and he does some things.
Welcome those of you joining us. We're glad you're here. We're talking to Ken, aka Zudan Silverheart, joining the conversation. We've been having a load of fun talking about some old gaming stuff and really anything's fair. Right now we're hearing Zudan's perspective of the other characters, and so if you're one of those other players who logged in, this is your chance to figure out what he really thinks about things. But so you mentioned Felix, and I think God rest his soul. But Felix now is playing. There, sneaky text. Rip. Rest in peace, Felix. Yep. Welcome to the show. Now he's playing Shepard Brinley, but I'm just curious because I always think it's really fun dialogue. What was Zudan's perspective of Felix?
Felix was definitely very shady, right? He had an alternative motive. It's pretty obvious from the get-go. He was there because he was trapped just like everybody else, but he had his own way of manipulating the situation. So he always had an alternate motive in mind. And it was Zudan saw that, and he knew that he had alternate motive, but it didn't seem like it was anything against the party. It was just his own personal gain in some way or fashion. So it was nothing that really required Zudan to really come out and confront him about anything. I think the moment his motive started intersecting with the party in a bad way, then I think Zudan may have probably set him aside and said, "Look, what's going on with you?" But until then, You just let him do his thing, right? And I like to look at Felix in a way, I think that Zuden might look at him, which is magic is a mysterious thing, right? He understands divine magic. He gets the power from his god. It's holy. He gets it. He understands it. But arcane magic is a completely different animal, right? You're pulling that power out of the weave and you're making it into something, whatever, and you're doing something. And he has no concept of what the heck all these movements are and the components and all that stuff. It's super intellectual. And he's like, I don't get it. I don't understand how you do it.
Right.
But he does it. So I think that's one thing that people maybe don't look at when it comes to magic users in game or even warlocks, is that they're doing the seemingly impossible. Right?
Right. Yeah.
What they do is impossible. Magic shouldn't exist. It does in this world. They pull things out of midair and they do things amazingly. And I think that regular commoners who are in a world maybe of low magic or have not seen magic very often should just be like, blink, blink, blink.
What just happened? Yeah.
What just happened?
Disbelief.
Exactly.
The shroud.
The shroud is
destroyed. Yeah.
So I like to bring that a little bit to Zuden, where he understands magic exists. He's not he's worldly in that sense. He's experienced in that sense that he understands it, but he doesn't quite understand it in the sense of like Felix did.
Right.
And so
I gotta share something with you because you'll get a kick out of this. But Brad Gunnels pinged a little bit ago and liked the video, and Brad's an old friend of ours as well. So hi Brad,
hey,
if you're still watching, glad you're here. Anyway. Yeah, so all very interesting. It'll be interested to see what Jason does with his new character, Mr. Brinley. And that one's kind of an interesting story. Yeah, and what's interesting about Shepard is his backstory. Jason was able to put together a fairly complex backstory in not a lot of time. One of the things I think our players are starting to realize is, this campaign module ain't no joke. They wrote it, and it's vicious. There's some gnarly things in here that if you make a little mistake, and I'll give Jason credit. I mean, he played his character and he was being sly and smart. He definitely was able to personify why you don't split the party in a combat. I think you cannot have asked for a more perfect, like. It could have been a freaking video. This, kids, is why you don't split the party. Splat.
You know what I mean? At least. Exactly.
Yeah, in combat. Like, so God rest him. So what is your bet? Who's gonna go next? Who's gonna get the axe next? This always feels like such a terrible thing to ask as a DM, but I can't help it, right?
Well, I think it really matters. It could go any way, right? Because it really depends on the roles. A lot of it depends on roles. We could all be very intelligent players with this. We could try to think this through and do everything perfectly. But if you can't roll to save your life, whatever you're thinking about is just gonna die. It's just gonna. It's not gonna work. So, one, it could be any one of you all roll bad. But two, I think one of these days something big is gonna realize the weaknesses in the party and exploit them, because we're not going to be fighting monsters the entire time, right? It's easy to fight monsters. It's easy to fight bandits. It's easy to fight things that just kill you for no apparent reason or want to eat you. They all have a very simpler mindset, right? It's all instinctual.
Right.
But the moment you start dealing with a monster or a villain that thinks and looks at weaknesses, tries to exploit the party's weaknesses, that's when things go to shit in a handbasket pretty quick. Because the players are not expecting it. They never expect it. Even me, who, I have over 20 years of experience in role-playing and gaming, and more than that, actually. You don't know when that shoe's going to drop.
Yeah.
It's just a completely different play style. Like, I can play balls to the wall very aggressively with a character I know I can be aggressive with, as long as I understand that the DM is not yet at the point where the villain knows your weakness. The moment that happens, my playstyle changes completely. Because now I have to play on the defense. I have to start wondering, okay, if he knows this weakness, how do I counter that weakness? Right? Or if I know somebody else's weakness, how do I help that other person shore up their weaknesses with my character? And we start to help each other as a group, as a party. And that's what you need. That's when you get to that point in the game, that's when things get real interesting.
Yeah.
Because you start thinking, okay, the monk can do this. Okay, that's a good thing here. I can do this. If I'm down over here, can this person shore that up? Do we have more than one healer? That kind of dynamic happens. And a good example, the Shambling Mount in the Death House. We were one round away from a complete total wipe. I had to count steps and figure out which people to bring up with my spells as a cleric in order to best survive that interaction. And I had to figure out, okay, who do I bring up who has healing? Who do I know can stand there and has a highest AC who might be able to take hits? I had to think about that before I started bringing people up to cure light wounds, because that's all I had, cure wounds at the first level.
Yep.
That's the kind of thought process that you don't get unless you play the game. It's just experience.
Yeah.
And there's no book you can read that will tell you that.
Nope.
That's just playing the game. And I think when everybody gets to a certain point in levels, and as long as the DM realizes, well, the DM has to be experienced, then you start going, okay, this is no longer a hack and slash. This is a
chess
cruise
game.
missile. Yeah, this is a cruise missile versus a sea whiz. This is battleship versus destroyer and submarine. You're playing the game and you're trying to figure out each other's weaknesses, and you have to remember. This is so important for a lot of parties that don't understand it. You don't have to fight to the death. There is something called fleeing and surviving to fight another day. That should always be an option on the table. It should always be an option on the table. Yeah. Unless you guys are playing 6 paladins who think about nothing but dying as zealots.
That is the ultimate cause, right?
Right. Death is the ultimate glory. Then, yeah, sure. But unless you're doing that, no one's going to fight to the death. They're going to try and figure out a way out.
Yep.
And it's called a retreat, right? The military uses it all the time. Not everybody fights to the death, so.
Yep. Yeah,
I think people have to realize that.
It's going to be... It'll be, like I said, it'll be really interesting. And we've got, I think that we're right at we're kind of getting close to that transition point where it's, I mean, and I think you and probably some of the other players who played before, watching these little subtle interactions or pop-ups of Strahd, interacting with you guys, probably knows there's more at play, and what's going on with that. And even some of the situations you guys have found is like, how much of that is somebody screwing with me versus actually, doing something. So it'll be interesting. So, all right. So coming up on the next game, the next installment, as it were, next Wednesday, the party, I mean, to summarize, what you guys have been through, has been pretty interesting. But now you guys you solved the winery mystery, kind of. It's not all the way solved. Who knows if you'll go back and try to figure that out or not at some point. But you did get the wine back. But there's the go there and figure out what's going on with the missing orbs thing. That bit, the missing pieces from that is impacting the ability to grow things out there. There's the there's so many different paths. Where is Zuden leaning? Which way is his lord leading him?
I think his thought process, because his wisdom is so high, and it's really a stat I'm really relying on, is his wisdom. Is his force of will, right? His tenacity. Is what can he find that can give some kind of clue, some kind of inkling as to how to defeat Strahd? Right? Something. Because we're starting to figure out that this is all played out before. Right? This is not something like, hey, we're the first adventurers to come through and try this. No. Hundreds, if not thousands of adventurers have already come in here at some point in time over the generations and have died, right? Have been trapped here. And then most likely vampire spawn or werewolves now or something. But when that guy when Shepard came out and said, hey, what about the druids in attacking this place? And we're like, you're over 100 years old, stuck in stone, and you're talking about the druids still. Obviously, they weren't around here that long, according to these people.
Mm-hmm.
But 2 generations ago, apparently they did this again, right? So there's this repeating loop of actions. It's almost like a haunting that is just on repeat, right? It's
right.
Everybody's stuck in the same loop. And I think the key is to somehow figure out how to break that loop. If you can somehow stop the loop, even a little bit, that would not only make Strahd pissed off because he's created these loops. He's the one engineering these loops. It's a big game for him. Even what's her name? The girl who was Ishtar and I can't remember her name. Anyways, the woman that was the daughter of the Burgermeister of that town. Obviously, he has a special attraction to her, right? How many different generations of that exact same person did Strahd try to woo or seduce or whatever that he's trying to do with it? Who knows, right? So that's I think the underlying mystery is trying to figure out just how long this has been going on, what the loops are, how to break the loops, and whatever Xudin can find to lead him towards that kind of realization, he's going to pursue. But the problem is he hasn't explored the entire land yet, so he has no idea what's out there. So I think that's the big thing is let's go to each one of these important locations, figure out what's there, why it's such a bad place, and if we can get some information from whatever's there, maybe it'll lead to the next clip. And that's all you can really do is keep doing that until you get to a point where you're powerful enough and you're armed with enough material and information and maybe some weapons or some artifacts that you can go to Strahd at the very end and defeat him. Or go completely off the rails, and this is up to you, Micah, but completely come up with a completely different solution that's not just confronting Strahd. It's something completely different. Who knows?
Maybe you guys will ultimately find happiness in Barovia. I mean, it's a nice place. Kinda. I mean, you can live forever. Hey.
Yeah, maybe Brune will open up a tavern and have a little temple in Moradin next to it, and it will be the temple and tavern combo.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it'd be
like great. A gas station with Popeyes in it.
Exactly. Get your hair care and tire products all in the same place.
Exactly.
No, and I think that is interesting. The authors definitely they've left it open that there are several different outcomes to this, right? And they range all over the spectrum. I think that one thing though that it would be hard to not be inevitable at this point because of actions already taken place, is you didn't get here by happenstance. One, it wasn't an accident that you guys came in at all, or find yourselves here. And then I think secondly is it goes back to what you're saying, these loops, right? These constant ties. So at some point an interaction's coming. At some point, there is definitely a crossroad. It's something that's going to happen. It's when will it happen? How prepared will you be? And what is the outcome is going to really be, I think, the fun part to watch come through. I mean, you're right. There's other things in this world of people that like Strahd and people that are working against Strahd, and there are things within Strahd himself that you guys haven't figured out yet. And you talked about that. Hey, there's this seemingly love thing going on between him and God, now I can't remember her name either.
I have to look through my notes.
That's whole thing is taking place as well. So, Irina. Yeah, thank you, buddy. We got
Ismark Irina.
Gildan is watching the show right now. Hey, Gildan, glad you're here. And so it'll be interesting to see how these things continue. But I think that, and this is why I'm so curious about which direction you guys go next, because just like any good role-playing game, for every real plot hook that advances the main storyline, there's 100 subplots or possible other alternatives, right? I mean, there's all sorts of things going on. And so what'll be interesting is will the party be able to see through what is I'm not going to say side quest because they're all there for a reason. But what is a side quest versus what really is going on, right? So that'll be interesting. So
I think if you're a vampire and you live forever, assume that, number one, and you control land that's yours and is cursed, and you can't leave it, and no one else can either. I think you get pretty damn bored after a while. It comes right down to it. I think Strahd's just bored. And the whole reason he brings all these adventurers in is because the adventurers are new. They're not a piece on the existing play field that he's already manipulated 1,000 times over 1,000 years. They're someone new who can put a different dynamic into things. And I think in the end, if the characters get to the point where they can defeat Strahd or to the same power level, I think Strahd is actually kind of looking forward to it. He's kind of like half of him is going, yes, I want to survive because I'm Strahd and I'm just innate ability, just innate want to survive. But part of him is also going, I kind of hope they kill me. At least that would end this curse and this suffering I've gone through for the last 1,000 years.
Right.
And I think so. I think Strahd is on both sides of that. And if we can somehow get him on the point where we tap into his good side, what's left of it, where he goes, yes, I need to die in order to end the curse so those people can be free for the rest of eternity and Barovia can become good again. Well, that's it.
Yeah. Well, cool. I want to say, God, we've been out this for almost an hour and a half. Can you believe it?
Jeez.
I want to say it has been awesome talking with you, Ken, and reliving some history and past, and I'm looking forward to where this game goes in the future, and maybe next time we'll talk and share with our watchers and listeners a little bit more about our Star Wars campaign and what might happen then, and but I'll be really
Star Wars campaign was awesome.
Yeah, and so we'll get back around to that, and then see where hopefully Zudan will still be amongst the living next time we talk. Who knows?
He's their only cleric, so you better hope he survives.
Yeah. But again, thank you for sitting down with me and chatting with me tonight, and I look forward to our next gaming session.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks.
All right. Any last words before we're out of here?
I don't know. By Morden's beard.
By Morden's beard. All right. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon on our next edition of Before the Curse.
Bye-bye.